Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to talk about my first league game in our Firefight League. But before we dig in, I'd like to make a few announcements. First up, my son and I have been absolutely crushing the Lord of the Rings movies. I'm pretty excited that he's getting into them. I'm a big fan of the Lord of the Rings, having read the books and seen the movies multiple times. I'm not what they would call maybe like a buff. I don't know everything there is to know, but I know I do enjoy them. A huge fan of The Hobbit as far as the book goes. I'm not a big fan of the movie, although I've heard that there's a like a fan cut of the movie that cuts out a lot of the extraneous bullshit and kind of condenses it into a single movie instead of three separate movies, and that's a pretty watchable experience. But I don't know if that actually exists, and even if it does, I don't know if it still exists, or whether or not somebody has slapped that fan cut with a cease and desist anyway. But that being said, he has been asking me about the Middle-earth strategy battle game, which I've played a few years back, and it's in a new edition now, so I'll be curious to see if there's any big changes. I've done some research, and it doesn't look like it's been massive overhauls to the core system, maybe just how the armies work. So look forward to some Middle-earth based content here as well. We're probably going to do some sort of scenic table board diorama kind of situation, and when we do that, I'll probably record that. So you'll get to see some more hobby-centric stuff, which isn't something I do a lot of. So that'll be pretty neat, something to kind of change it up. You get to see my subpar crafting and hobbying skills on full display. That being said, I did also want to remind everybody, we've got these handsome Litko tokens. These are Litko Firefight tokens. It is labeled a single player set, but this is everything that you get. And you can see there's actually almost enough for 2 players. It's going to have a bunch of damage markers. That's what those 1s and 2s and 3s up at the top are in red. It's going to have hit modifiers like +1, -1, stuff like that. You're going to have 15 activation tokens, 6 smoke tokens, 6 Overwatch tokens, a bunch of pin tokens, some broken tokens, some hit the dirt tokens, and 6 objective markers. So it's actually almost enough that 2 players could use it. If one player brought those tokens, both players could almost use everything outside the activation tokens. That'd be the only thing you're short on. It's a fantastic token set. I have my own already. If you see me at Michigan GT, or if you come out to my Knox tournament, the Knoxtoberfest tournament, you'll get to see them. I'll make sure I have them both places, so that'll be really cool. Again, I look forward to seeing everybody when we do those events. I'm really happy I get to go out to Lansing and see the community out that way. And Brian, awesome organizer. I met him last year at the GT. So again, I'm very pumped. Other than that, if you like the videos and you haven't liked or subscribed, make sure you do that. I appreciate it. It goes a long way for me to continue making content. I'm not a professional YouTuber. This is not my full-time job. This is a hobby. I do it for fun. I do like that I make a little extra money because that is really just my hobby budget at this point, so that's pretty cool. But it doesn't cost you anything other than a little bit of time, and if you're going to be here anyway, just do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. And then I get to make content, you get to help fund my hobby budget, and you get good content, and we just kind of meet in the middle there. It doesn't cost you anything extra. That being said, I think we can dive into what everybody wants to dive into, and that's going to be the episode. So round 1 kicked off. Izzy played Kyle, and she ended up winning. It was like a 10-point game, pretty close. They had a good time. Styrians, Austin, he ended up playing Night Stalkers, and that was not so close. He kind of hammered the Night Stalkers, but his opponent, Rich, is a relatively new player. He's only got maybe 5 games under his belt, and Austin and I have played quite a few games, so Austin's becoming a menace, which is, I love to see it. And then we've got 1 game still hanging, and that is Marauders versus Enforcers. They should be wrapped up this weekend. But my game was against Plague, and it's against one of our local Plague players who's actually a very good player. He and I have played a lot of games. He's been to all my tournaments that I've run for the most part. He came to Adepticon, so he's been playing, high-skill games for about a year now. He got into it basically when I did, so that was pretty cool. And our games are almost always very close, and they almost always come down to 1 or 2 missteps on either one of our parts. couple times where he's gotten the better of me, it's because I've made some mistakes. A couple times where I've gotten the better of him, and that's because he's made some mistakes. And this is no different. Before we dive into the game itself, and I'm not going to go line by line through the game, but I do want to kind of give the overarching theme and feel. I wanted to just remind everybody what my list was, and we're going to blast through it. We're not going to talk in depth. It is just a Steel Warrior Huskarl, a Forge Guard Huskarl, a Drakkar APC, 3 units of Steel Warriors. Each one has 2 Magma Cannons, 2 units of Hammer Fist Drop Troopers, and then the Battle Tank. And we both made some misplays, but my misplays were less punishing. And we're going to talk about that. We played the new mission. Poop, I don't even remember what it's called. Let's look it up. So the first round mission was Secure the Line. This is one of the new missions in the new Command Protocols book. And I actually have played a few games of it already. And I enjoy it because it forces players to have to play the game. I'm a big fan of missions forcing players to have to play to try to prevent players from just turtling. I'm not a big fan of turtling and stationary, sit there and not play the game style armies and interactions. So anything that it kind of forces players to move and play, I'm a huge fan of. For this game, I put both units of Hammer Fist Drop Troopers into Deep Strike. Standard hamburger or hot dog style deployment zone, not hamburger, sorry, hot dog style. And if you went to elementary school, you know what it is. That's it. And then you score points by controlling these middle zones here where my cursor is. So if you control Zone A and Zone C are worth the same amount of points. So round 1, they're both worth 2, then they're worth 3, then they're worth 4, and then you count back down. So round 4, they're worth 3, they're on 5, they're worth 2. So holding those middle zones in the middle of the game is really important. And then Zone B, which is the dead center middle area of the table, it goes 3, 4, 5, 4, 3. So it's worth more points. And really the way the game panned out is we just kind of took turns controlling the middle. And I was able to control it a little bit longer to make our final score. I think it was 25-23 is how it shook out. But super fun mission. I enjoy it. I think it's rough at 1250, but I think 1250 is just kind of a weird points to play the game at anyway. And I've said that before. And the only reason we play 1250 is because that's where like things like the Michigan GT are at 1250. And I've talked to the TO for Adepticon, and hopefully he's on board, but I'd like to see it move to 1500. If players know their shit, you can get a 1500 point game in about an hour and a half to 2 hours. But that does require a certain level of just sitting up, getting to the table, playing your game, which can be a little off-putting for some players, and I understand that. You know, you come to these tournaments and there is a social aspect to it, so you don't want it to feel like a business-like transaction. But I think 2 hours at 1,500 points is an adequate time limit for people coming to a national level tournament. I think, you know, if you time out, there's nothing wrong with timing out. But if you time out, it's probably because you don't know your rules as well as you arguably should if you're playing at a tournament like that. And so, you know, I'm not putting anybody down. It's more just if you're going to come to a big tournament, you got to be prepared to be playing at a high level. And if you're okay with timing out, and if you're okay with the understanding that you're probably going to lose because you're playing against high-level players, that's also fine too. But that also means high-level players, you shouldn't be shitty with people because they're timing out, because people have different expectations out of the game. Anyway, this is the mission. Super cool mission. Had a lot of fun with it. So, Rules Committee, my hat's off to you. This is a great mission. I'd like to see some different deployment zones, and that's actually something we're going to be play testing at my tournament at Oktoberfest, is we're going to do a mission with some different deployment zones. And I know that can kind of skew things, but if I do 2 standard missions and 1 off mission, I don't think it'll skew things too badly. Anyway, so turn 1 and deployment. So when I deployed, you can see my cursor here. I basically have my whole army midboard and right flank here. You know, B and C. And I just figured I'd give him Area A, that's just the way it was going to be, and I would fight him over B and C. He torpedoed, what is it, the aberration? I always call it one thing, and it's always something else. Because there's a 40k unit called the Abominant, I believe, and then this is the Aberration, and I think I call this the Aberration, even though, or I call it the Abominant. Like, I get them flip-flopped, and they're actually kind of a similar role. It's a Gene Stealer cult unit, but anyway, so I think it's the Aberration. He torpedoed an Aberration into me. I don't think he killed a unit, but I think he took out like 4 dudes in one of my squads off rip. Bam. Super quick. But then I was able to just lift it instantly by dumping a bucket of anti-tank shooting into it. And it's funny because somebody in one of the comments, I don't remember who it was, but somebody in the comments was just like, that's a lot of anti-tank shooting. And I'm like, yeah, it is. Because I've got rifles that are trademarked, so I can double my shots with the rifles if I need volume. And then I've got anti-tank. I don't see a need for some of the other stuff. Arguably, I could probably have used with a little bit more pinning, but that's not the end of the world. Because pinning's one of those things where it's really good into Plague until it's not. You know, they have a handful of unflinching units. They almost always have enough command points to just shed any pin at the end of the round, because they just get so many damn command points. I've yet to play, and maybe this isn't the case across the board, but I've yet to play against a Plague army. My daughter, Garrett, a couple of the dudes I've played at some of the other tournaments I've been to, like, they just get so many command points that it just makes pinning feel almost useless unless you can tag them early in the activation, and hopefully it's not an unflinching unit. You know, and even unflinching, that pin token might be useful. Like, that modifier might still come in clutch. But at the end of the day, I don't know. This was a tough matchup for me, and I knew it was gonna be. And I don't mean to be all over the place. I haven't had my Adderall today, and so I'm kind of ping-ponging, and I apologize for that. But we played our game. He torpedoed the Aberration into me. He actually ended up torpedoing a Plague Lord into me, and it killed my Forge Father, or Forge Guard Huskarl, very early. And so I was playing a lot of the game with just like 1 orange die instead of 2, low on command points. But that's one thing I've also noticed about dwarves is, by and large, they're kind of a command point thirsty army anyway. You know, you really have to bring a lot of commanders or some expensive ones to get those command points, and rightfully so. Some of their orders are just bonkers good. But then he did also end up lifting that Plague Lord immediately, but it took way more effort than it should have. And that wasn't a mistake, but that's one of those areas where the dice could have severely impacted the game. Because I dumped my whole army into that Plague Lord to kill him, and it wasn't that he was super good or super bad. It was that I would get like 100% hit rate, but then I would only damage him with maybe 1 die. And he might have like his Resilient Aura popped or something, and then I'd have to re-roll, and then I would fail it. And then like all my anti-tank stuff that would be damaging him on maybe 4s, I'd roll 2s, 3s. So it's one of those where the dice just didn't want him to die until I dumped my whole army into him. And that was one of those times where I was looking at the table and I thought, oh, fuck. Like, this could be bad. You know, they have that mobility. I knew it was going to be a tough matchup, going back to what I was saying. You know, I wasn't going to be able to sit. And I don't really play dwarves as a sitting army. I do some sitting, but we talked about this last week, where I talked about how I kind of do what we call in the military like a bounding overwatch, where I have one unit static and maybe they're shooting, and then another unit run up, and I'm always kind of like doing things alternating, and that's kind of how I keep them moving. I don't always have to do it that way, but that's one of the ways I do it. I ended up bringing in, like, this is how bad it was shooting into the Plague Lord. I ended up having to drop in Hammer Fist drop troops in my deployment zone where he was, just so I could clear him out. Because I couldn't have him just going ham on me wherever he wanted and lifting just whole units by himself. I had to make sure he went away. That was kind of one of those moments where, like I said, that could have really swung the game. But it was immediately followed up by a tactical error by Garrett, my opponent, where he was coming around and I was like, hey, I've got this over here. I was like, you haven't done anything. You don't have to, like, you could take that back. And he was like, oh, I forgot about that, but I've already moved the models. Like, that's okay. You know, so it's one of those where he didn't necessarily make a mistake. He forgot that a thing existed. I reminded him, and he was just like, no, I'm gonna commit to it. And by committing to it, that lifted one of his units of ghouls. Because he had like 3 min squads of ghouls just for like running out, grabbing objectives, that type of stuff, and then a ton of leapers was effectively his list. A couple aberrations and a plague lord. But you get what I'm... Oh, and Teratons. And Teratons, boy, I will tell you, Teratons will just rip ass through dwarfs. Like, those things, that was probably what did 80% of the work for his army. And part of it, again, was just dice. Every time I would shoot at the Teratons, same thing as with the Plague Lord. And I mean, I would hit him with like AP4 anti-tank, and I'd be like, okay, I'm finally going to get this thing. And then I would roll a 1 on my damage die. That type of stuff. And again, it is a dice game. That's how it goes. It's just one of those where it was, man, it really felt like those dice did not want me to win at all. It was a struggle, and I don't even think I killed them all by the end of the game, and I shot the shit out of them. I would put a whole squad of Hammerfist drop troops into them. I would put my tank into them, all kinds of stuff. You know, the magma cannons, anything I could, I would dump into them, and I think I killed 1 squad. And then the other squad of 2, I think I killed 1 Teraton. So he had 4 Teratons, and I'm pretty sure he had 1 left at the end of the game. And it wasn't because I wasn't trying to kill it. It was because the game was just like, no, you don't get to today. That being said, the Teratons, I would argue, is probably one of the biggest, like, tear up a dwarf army units out there because of the teleport, being able to shut off charge reactions. I know I think they're AP1 with anti-tank, but that will chew through dwarf infantry. It will make very quick work of dwarf infantry. So you're going to want to make sure if you're a dwarf player, if they've got Teratons, you need to do something about them quickly. You know, you're going to want to bait them out with something. You're going to want to try to shoot them off the table afterwards, stuff like that. What you can't do is you can't ignore them. That's a unit you can't just leave to its own devices if you're playing Forge Fathers. You're going to have to make sure you target them, get them off the board early, and be done with it. His ghouls, I did kill basically as fast as I could. That was my priority. If I killed the ghouls, that would force the rest of his army to have to spread out, and he couldn't just have these cheap units sitting around scoring points. He had 1 unit kind of over in Section A here, just scored in that section the whole time, and then I think I scored Section C almost the whole game, and then B is where we flip-flopped. And like I said, I think that's how it basically went. And the final score was like 24, 23, 25, 23, something like that. And it was a bloodbath, but he scored it well. Kill points, I killed 960-ish of his army, and he killed about 120 points of my army, total units. Not models, but total units. No, it was more than that. It was about 300 points. Sorry, about 300 points of my army, because he killed 2 units. And so he played it really well. The torpedoing of the aberration, I think, was more of a kind of probing because he hadn't played against Forge Fathers in a while, so he needed to send something out there and kind of see what happened. The misplay from the ghouls, I think, hurt him because that took some unit strength off the board that could have arguably kept him in the game because he might have ended up scoring that middle, which could have caused a big swing. It's an impactful enough point in the game that we can't even determine what happens from there because it would drastically just change the outcome of the game. Had those ghouls not come out, I would have had to have shot something else, done something else, and it would have just completely changed the outlook and outcome of the game. So it's real hard to say what happens from there, but it was one of those pivotal moments. I think me bringing those drop troops in to get rid of the Plague Lord, that was potentially a pivotal moment. The big thing there was I was able to next turn at least slap them with the order to give them extra speed to get them out into the scoring zones. So that was nice. So that was my round 1 experience playing Plague against Forge Fathers. And like I said, I knew going into it, it was going to be a brutal, brutal, tough game in terms of thinking. And it was like we both had to put our big brains on, and we both had to play a really good tight game. It's looking like round 2. It's going to really depend on the score of the Enforcers Marauders game. With this type of mission, if I had to make a prediction, I would predict that the Marauders win for 2 reasons. The Enforcers player is relatively new, whereas the Marauders player has at least gotten a couple tournaments under his belt. And I think just table presence. Those 2 things combined, I think, are going to be what puts the Marauders player ahead in terms of capability. The score is going to, if he outscores me, the way we've got the league set up, is if the Marauders win and they outscore me, they're going to end up playing Asterians. Because they'll be the 2 highest scoring teams or factions. And if he doesn't outscore me, then I get to play Asterians. And that's going to be... I just played him not that long ago. We actually just talked about it. How my drop troops came in, just destroyed his assassin, and it drastically impacted the outcome of the game. The round 2 mission, I don't remember it. It's controlled advance. So we will do a preview once I find my opponent, figure out who it is. But it's going to be either Asterians or Plague. I don't think there's any other option. Yes, there is. Because if he scores more than Izzy but less than me, I'd end up playing him. So it's basically up in the air. But I do think the Marauders will win just because of experience. And I think what's going to happen is I'm going to say he scores about 20 points. And I think I end up playing Asterians. That's my prediction. We'll see if I'm right. But anyway, controlled advance. After the player with the initiative has chosen their deployment zone, but before either player deploys any models, you play 8 objective markers total on the table. The player that has the initiative, and then you alternate placing 4 wholly within the 6 inches of the center, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this is the one where you have 2 objectives in your deployment zone, and then a bunch in the middle. And I will tell you right now, on this mission, I would much rather play against Asterians than Marauders. I will not have the table presence to just sit and camp objectives and still be able to shoot and move and communicate. It's going to be a real rough matchup. I'm going to need to basically focus on removal early and see if I can ramp score later. If I end up playing Asterians, we're going to be much more matched in terms of number of units. So I won't feel as much pressure to focus on removal as much. So we'll see. I wanted to just kind of drop in, share everything with everybody. Again, I apologize if I was a little all over the place. Some days when I don't have the medicine, it just, this is where I'm at. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you Thursday. I'll have a video of some sort Thursday.